A cop finds a homeless girl alone in a cold, empty parking lot, clutching nothing but a worn teddy bear. When he asks her where her mom is, her innocent reply shatters him. "Mommy doesn't want me anymore." The officer takes her in, trying to uncover the truth, but nothing about her story adds up. A cryptic note hidden in her teddy bear leads to chilling clues: a missing mother, a mysterious key, and a heartbreaking drawing of a woman on the floor. As the pieces start to come together, a shadowy figure claiming to be her family suddenly appears. But is he here to help, or to take her away for good? Who left this little girl behind? And can this officer protect her from the secrets threatening to destroy everything she knows? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Officer Lucas Hayes pulled his patrol car into the empty suburban parking lot, his breath visible in the crisp winter morning air. The sun had barely risen, casting long shadows across the frost-covered asphalt. Something caught his eye: a small figure sitting alone on the concrete curb near the grocery store entrance. His heart skipped a beat. Through the windshield, he could make out a little girl, no more than 3 or 4 years old, clutching a well-loved teddy bear to her chest. Her pink winter coat was slightly unzipped, and her matching boots swung back and forth as she sat there, seemingly unbothered by the cold. Lucas parked the car and stepped out slowly, not wanting to startle her. His police training kicked in, but so did something deeper: memories of his little sister that he usually kept locked away. He approached with measured steps, keeping his voice gentle. "Hi there, sweetheart. I'm Officer Lucas. Are you okay?" The little girl looked up at him with large brown eyes, surprisingly calm for someone so young sitting alone in the cold. Her teddy bear had a missing eye and worn fur, clearly a constant companion. "I'm Zoe," she said softly, hugging her bear tighter. Lucas knelt down to her level, maintaining a careful distance. "That's a nice name, Zoe. And who's your furry friend there?" "This is Mr. Snuggles," she replied, holding up the bear. "He keeps me warm." "Where are your parents, Zoe? Is your mommy or daddy nearby?" Zoe's lower lip trembled slightly, and her words hit Lucas like a punch to the gut. "Mommy doesn't want me anymore." Lucas felt his throat tighten. In his 10 years on the force, cases involving children always affected him the most. "Why do you think that, sweetheart?" "We were playing hide-and-seek," Zoe explained, her small voice matter-of-fact. "But when I found her, she wouldn't wake up to count. She just stayed sleeping on the floor." Lucas's police instincts immediately sharpened. He keyed his radio, calling for backup while keeping his voice steady and calm. "Zoe, would you like to come with me? I know a nice warm place where we can get some hot chocolate, and my friend Officer Maria would love to meet Mr. Snuggles." Zoe considered this for a moment, studying Lucas's face with surprising intensity for a 3-year-old. "Do you have marshmallows?" A smile tugged at Lucas's lips despite the severity of the situation. "The tiny ones that float in your cup? You bet we do." At the station, Officer Maria Delgado was already waiting with a steaming cup of hot chocolate, complete with a generous helping of mini marshmallows. The kind-faced Latina officer had a way with children that Lucas had always admired. "Look who's here to meet you, Mr. Snuggles," Maria said warmly, pulling up a chair next to Zoe. "Would you like to tell us more about your game of hide-and-seek with Mommy?" While Maria gently questioned Zoe, Lucas stood back, watching the little girl sip her hot chocolate, leaving a tiny marshmallow mustache on her upper lip. His mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. The way Zoe described her mother's sleep sent warning signals through his experienced mind. He noticed little details about Zoe that spoke volumes. Her coat was clean but slightly too small. Her hair was neatly braided but with yesterday's rubber band. Her boots were well worn but cared for. Signs of a parent who tried their best but might have been struggling. Zoe's innocent voice cut through his thoughts. "Mommy usually wakes up to finish our games. She didn't wake up this time." She paused, looking down at Mr. Snuggles. "I waited a really long time." Lucas felt his chest tighten. In his line of work, he'd seen too much, lost too much. But something about Zoe's quiet resilience, her trust in them despite everything, stirred something protective in him that he thought he'd buried years ago. Lucas watched as Maria wrapped a soft blue blanket around Zoe's shoulders. The little girl had finished her hot chocolate and was now contentedly munching on animal crackers, carefully examining each one before taking a bite. The morning sun streamed through the station's windows, casting a warm glow on her dark curls. "Look, Officer Maria, this one's an elephant," Zoe declared, holding up the cookie with pride. "It sure is, Carino," Maria replied with a gentle smile, though her eyes met Lucas's with concern. Lucas sat at his desk reviewing the initial report. Something about this case nagged at him. Zoe was too calm, too well cared for to be a typical abandonment case. Her mother's sleep during hide-and-seek worried him more than he wanted to admit. Sergeant Raymond Blake, a veteran officer with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes, approached Lucas's desk. "Any luck tracking down the mother?" "Not yet, sir," Lucas replied, running a hand through his hair. "No missing person reports matching Zoe's description of her mother. No calls about disturbances in the area where we found her." Blake nodded thoughtfully, watching Zoe. "The girl seems well-adjusted, clean clothes, good manners. Doesn't fit the usual profile." "That's what's bothering me," Lucas agreed. He stood up, walking over to where Zoe sat with Maria. "Hey, Zoe, could I borrow Mr. Snuggles for a minute? I promised to be very careful with him." Zoe looked up, considering the request with adorable seriousness. "Okay, but he doesn't like being alone." "I'll stay right here with him," Lucas assured her, accepting the worn teddy bear. As he examined the stuffed animal, his trained eyes noticed something unusual, a slight bulge in the seam along Mr. Snuggles' back. Carefully, he felt along the worn fabric until his fingers found a small opening. Inside, he discovered a folded piece of paper. Lucas's heart raced as he carefully extracted the note. The paper was torn from a notebook, the handwriting rushed but legible. "I'm sorry, Zoe. Be brave for me." The words hit him like a physical blow. He handed the note to Sergeant Blake, whose expression darkened as he read it. "Mommy writes me notes sometimes," Zoe said suddenly, making them all jump. She had been watching them with those observant brown eyes. "She says it's because she loves me very much." Maria pulled Zoe closer, her protective instinct kicking in. "Of course she does, sweetie." Lucas knelt in front of Zoe, choosing his words carefully. "Zoe, can you tell me more about yesterday, before your mom started sleeping?" Zoe fiddled with another animal cracker, this one shaped like a lion. "Mommy was really tired. She said her heart felt heavy." She paused, breaking the cookie in half. "We played hide-and-seek because it's my favorite. But Mommy was too tired to count right. She kept saying numbers wrong, like 1, 4, 9, 3. Lucas and Blake exchanged alarmed looks. The symptoms Zoe described painted a disturbing picture. "She gave me extra hugs," Zoe continued, her voice small, "and told me I was her brave girl. Then she laid down on the floor and wouldn't wake up for our game." Maria wrapped her arms around Zoe, her eyes glistening with tears. Lucas felt his chest tighten with emotion. The note, combined with Zoe's innocent description, suggested something far more serious than simple abandonment. Blake pulled Lucas aside, keeping his voice low. "This could be an overdose situation, or worse. We need to find this mother fast." He glanced at Zoe, who was now showing Maria how to make her lion cookie roar. "For both their sakes." Lucas nodded, his protective instincts in overdrive. Looking at Zoe's brave little face, he made a silent promise to find out what happened to her mother. The truth was hidden somewhere in her innocent words about hide-and-seek and her mother's mysterious sleep. He just had to piece it together before it was too late. Maria brought over some crayons and paper to keep Zoe occupied while they worked. The little girl's face lit up at the sight of the colorful supplies, and she immediately began drawing with intense concentration, her tiny tongue poking out between her lips. Lucas couldn't help but smile as he watched her work. There was something about her innocent determination that reminded him of his own sister at that age. The memory brought a familiar ache to his chest, but for once it wasn't entirely painful. "What are you drawing there, sweetie?" Maria asked, kneeling beside Zoe's chair. My house, Zoe replied matter-of-factly, selecting a brown crayon. And Mommy. Lucas moved closer, his interest piqued. The drawing was typical of a 3-year-old, simple stick figures and basic shapes. But something about it made his police instincts stir. In the center of the paper, a stick figure lay flat on what appeared to be a brown rectangle, presumably the floor. Next to it was a misshapen circle with lines coming out of it. What's that next to your mom? Lucas asked gently, pointing to the circular shape. The clock, Zoe said, not looking up as she continued coloring. It fell down and went quiet. Mommy says we're not supposed to touch broken things. Maria and Lucas exchanged worried glances. The fallen clock, combined with Zoe's earlier description of her mother's confused counting, painted an increasingly concerning picture. Zoe, honey, Maria began carefully. Did you just move to our town? We haven't seen you around before. Zoe nodded, switching to a yellow crayon. Uh-huh. Mommy said we needed a fresh start. Our new house has pretty yellow flowers in the front. She yawned, her small hand rubbing at her eyes. They look like little suns. Yellow flowers, Lucas repeated, making a mental note. It wasn't much to go on, but it was something. He pulled Maria aside while Zoe continued drawing. Recent move means no established utilities yet, probably no mail forwarding setup, he said quietly. That's why we're having trouble finding records. Maria nodded. But yellow flowers? Daffodils, maybe? It's the right season for them. That could help narrow down the search area. As they discussed search strategies, they heard a soft thump. Turning around, they saw Zoe had fallen asleep at the table, her head resting on her artwork. Mr. Snuggles was clutched tightly in her arms, his worn fur pressed against her cheek. Lucas felt something shift inside him as he looked at the sleeping child. Her dark curls fell across her face, and her long eyelashes fluttered slightly as she dreamed. She looked so small, so vulnerable, yet so trusting. Even in her sleep, she held on to that teddy bear like it was her lifeline to her mother. I'll get her a proper blanket, Maria said softly, heading to the storage closet. Lucas carefully lifted Zoe from the chair, cradling her small form. She stirred slightly but didn't wake, instinctively curling closer to his chest. The simple gesture of trust made his throat tight with emotion. Maria returned with a blanket, and together they created a makeshift bed on the break room couch. As Lucas tucked the blanket around Zoe's shoulders, she mumbled something about her mommy in her sleep. We'll find her, Lucas whispered, more to himself than to the sleeping child. I promise. Looking down at Zoe's peaceful face, Lucas realized this case had become more than just another assignment. Something about this brave little girl and her mysterious situation had worked its way past his carefully maintained professional distance. He couldn't explain it, but he knew he wouldn't rest until he uncovered the truth about what happened to her mother. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the quiet suburban streets as Lucas drove slowly through another neighborhood. In the back seat, safely buckled into a borrowed car seat, Zoe pressed her face against the window, her eyes scanning each house they passed. Remember, sweetie, Lucas said gently, just tell me if you see anything familiar. Mr. Snuggles sat in Zoe's lap as she nodded, her small fingers absently stroking the teddy bear's worn fur. They'd been driving for nearly an hour, methodically covering areas with front gardens. Lucas kept his speed steady, giving the little girl time to look at each house. Suddenly, Zoe's body straightened. Yellow flowers, she exclaimed, pointing excitedly at a modest 2-story house with daffodils lining its front walkway. Lucas pulled over, hope rising in his chest. But as they got out to look closer, Zoe's excitement faded into confusion. Her lower lip began to tremble. That's not right, she whispered, clutching Mr. Snuggles tighter. The flowers looked the same, but... Tears welled up in her big brown eyes. I want Mommy. Lucas knelt down beside her, his heart aching at her distress. It's okay, Zoe. You're doing great helping us look. Back at the station, Evelyn Scott, the assigned social worker, waited for them. She was a stern-looking woman with graying hair pulled back in a tight bun, her lips pressed into a thin line as Lucas explained their unsuccessful search. Officer Hayes, she said, her tone clipped and professional, While I appreciate your dedication, we need to think about what's best for Zoe now. She needs proper temporary placement while we investigate this situation. Lucas felt his jaw tighten. We're making progress. She recognized elements of her neighborhood. If we just had more time. More time for what? Evelyn interrupted. The child has clearly been abandoned. She needs stability, not endless drives around town. This isn't abandonment, Lucas insisted, keeping his voice low to avoid upsetting Zoe, who sat nearby coloring. Something happened to her mother. The drawing, the things she said about her mom not waking up, are the confused statements of a traumatized 3-year-old, Evelyn finished. I'm sorry, but I'm initiating emergency placement procedures. Mommy gave me something special. Zoe's small voice cut through their argument. Both adults turned to look at her. She said I had to keep it safe. Lucas walked over and crouched beside her chair. What did she give you, Zoe? A special key, she said, hugging Mr. Snuggles. It's hiding. Lucas noticed Zoe's small purple backpack sitting beneath the table. With gentle movements, he picked it up. Is it okay if I look in here? Zoe nodded, watching intently as Lucas carefully examined the bag. In a small side pocket, partially hidden by a loose thread, he found it, a small brass key, unremarkable except for its obvious age. This is very important, isn't it? He asked Zoe, holding up the key. Mommy said it's for keeping treasures safe, Zoe replied solemnly. Evelyn stepped forward, her expression softening slightly. A safety deposit box key, perhaps? She suggested. It could help identify the mother. Lucas studied the key carefully, noting its worn edges and distinctive shape. It looked older than a modern safety deposit box key, but it was definitely made for a secure lock of some kind. Ms. Scott, he said, standing up, give me 24 hours with this lead, please. There's more to this story than abandonment, and this key might help us understand what really happened to Zoe's mother. Lucas sat in his patrol car, examining the brass key under the glow of his flashlight. Something about its design nagged at his memory. The worn edges, the distinctive notches. He'd seen keys like this before during his time working property crimes. Storage lockers, he muttered, turning the key over in his hands. The realization hit him like a bolt of lightning. He pulled out his phone and began searching for storage facilities in the area. There were 6 within a reasonable distance, and the key's aged appearance suggested an older establishment. Lucas decided to keep this lead to himself for now. If he involved Evelyn Scott, she might shut down his investigation before he could find answers. The first 2 facilities were dead ends, modern buildings with electronic keypads and standardized locks. The third facility, Riverside Storage, made his heart skip a beat. The aging complex of metal units had the same type of locks he'd been looking for. A sleepy-eyed clerk named Pete sat behind the counter, barely glancing up from his crossword puzzle as Lucas entered. The small office smelled of coffee and dust. Morning, Lucas said, showing his badge. I'm investigating a case and was wondering if you could help me identify which unit this key belongs to. Pete squinted at the key. Yeah, that's one of ours. Old-style units, East Section. He flipped through a worn logbook. Would need a warrant to give you specific details, though. Lucas nodded, keeping his expression neutral. Just need to know if it's still active. Missing persons case. Something in his tone must have reached Pete, who looked up with more interest. Missing persons, huh? He studied the key again. Well, I suppose I could mention that the East Section starts with Unit E101. Lucas understood the hint. Thanks for your time. The East Section was a long row of identical orange doors. Lucas walked slowly, testing the key in each lock. At E107, it slipped in smoothly. His heart pounding, he turned it. The metal door creaked as he rolled it up. The space inside was small but neat, containing several cardboard boxes and a metal filing cabinet. Lucas pulled out his flashlight and stepped inside. The first box he opened contained photo albums. His throat tightened as he saw pictures of a smiling Zoe, birthday parties, park visits, quiet moments at home. In many photos, she was with a young woman who had to be her mother. Kara Thompson, according to the neat writing on the back of the photos. Another box held bundles of unsent letters all addressed to Michael. Lucas picked up one dated 3 months ago. Dear Michael, I know you think I'm making a mistake, but I have to try. Zoe deserves better than what we had growing up. I'm working 3 jobs now. It's hard, but when I see her smile, it's all worth it. I wish you could understand. At the bottom of the box, he found a leather-bound journal. The most recent entry was dated just days ago. I'm so tired. The night shift at the diner, then straight to cleaning houses, then the grocery store. I barely see Zoe anymore. The babysitter costs so much, but what choice do I have? Sometimes I feel like I can't breathe, like I'm drowning, but I have to keep going. Zoe is everything. I just need to hold on until things get better. Lucas closed the journal, his hands shaking slightly. The words painted a picture not of abandonment, but of a mother's desperate love and sacrifice. Something had happened to Kara. Something that left her unable to wake up when Zoe found her. He carefully repacked the boxes, his mind racing. These weren't the belongings of someone planning to abandon their child. They were treasures, carefully preserved by a mother who wanted her daughter to know how much she was loved. Lucas burst into the station, clutching Kara's journal to his chest. His eyes immediately found Maria at her desk, where she was organizing case files. I found something, he said, his voice tight with urgency. Maria looked up, pushing aside her paperwork as Lucas spread the contents from the storage locker across her desk. These are from a storage unit I tracked down, Lucas explained, laying out the photos one by one. The mother, her name is Kara Thompson. She's been working multiple jobs trying to make ends meet. Maria picked up one of the photos, studying the image of Kara and Zoe at what appeared to be a birthday party. She looks exhausted, even here, Maria observed softly. 3 jobs, Lucas confirmed, tapping the journal. Night shift at a diner, house cleaning during the day, and evenings at a grocery store. She was running herself into the ground. Not before they could discuss further, the station's front door swung open. A tall man in an expensive suit strode in, his polished shoes clicking against the linoleum floor. His presence commanded attention, but something about his confident swagger made Lucas's cop instincts tingle. I'm Michael Evans, the man announced, approaching their desk. I'm here about my daughter, Zoe. Lucas and Maria exchanged quick glances. Zoe, who had been coloring quietly in the break room, peeked around the doorframe at the sound of the commotion. Mr. Evans, Lucas said carefully, standing up, we'll need to verify your identity and relationship to Zoe. Michael pulled out a thick envelope of documents. I have everything right here. Birth certificate, custody papers, the works. I've been searching for them since Kara took off with my daughter. As Michael spoke, Zoe crept closer, partially hidden behind Lucas's legs. Her small fingers gripped his uniform pants tightly. When Michael turned to smile at her, she pressed her face against Lucas's knee. Princess, come give Daddy a hug. Michael opened his arms wide, but Zoe only clutched Lucas tighter. No, she whispered, her voice trembling. Not Daddy. Lucas felt his suspicion deepening. He'd seen enough cases to know when something wasn't adding up. The timing was too convenient, the documentation too ready. Officer Hayes. Evelyn Scott's sharp voice cut through the tension as she clicked down the hallway in her sensible heels. I need to speak with you about Zoe's placement immediately. Not now, Lucas said firmly, his hand instinctively moving to rest protectively on Zoe's head. Yes, now, Evelyn insisted. We have a potential father here, and protocols must be followed. Maria stepped forward, positioning herself subtly between Michael and Zoe. We'll need to run these documents through proper channels first, she said professionally. Standard procedure. Michael's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course. Take all the time you need. I just want what's best for my little girl. But Lucas noticed how Michael's eyes kept darting to the papers on Maria's desk, the photos and journal entries that told Kara's story. There was something predatory in his gaze that made Lucas's skin crawl. Zoe, sweetheart, Lucas said gently, crouching down to her level. Do you know this man? Zoe shook her head vigorously, her eyes filling with tears. Want mommy, she whimpered. "This is ridiculous," Michael scoffed. "She's clearly confused, traumatized by what her mother did." "What exactly did her mother do?" Lucas interrupted sharply, noting how quickly Michael had jumped to accusations. The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Michael's confident facade cracked for just a moment, revealing something darker underneath. After Michael Evans and Evelyn Scott left the station, the atmosphere slowly shifted back to a calmer state. Zoe settled at a small table in the break room, her crayons scattered across its surface as she drew picture after picture. "What are you drawing there, sweetheart?" Lucas asked, pulling up a chair beside her. Zoe held up her latest masterpiece, a swirl of colors featuring 2 stick figures. "This is me and Mommy at the park," she explained proudly. "We had ice cream and I got chocolate all over my shirt." She giggled at the memory, her eyes sparkling. Lucas felt his heart squeeze. Here was this little girl, caught in the middle of something terrible, yet still able to find joy in her memories. "Tell me more about your adventures with your mom," he encouraged gently. "Mommy always sings silly songs when we walk to the store," Zoe said, reaching for a purple crayon. "Even when she's super tired, she makes funny faces to make me laugh." Maria watched from the doorway, a soft smile on her face as Lucas listened intently to each of Zoe's stories. The little girl was slowly bringing out a side of her partner she'd never seen before. Later that afternoon, Lucas decided to follow up on the addresses he'd found in Kara's journal. The first stop was Sarah's diner, where Kara had worked the night shift. "Oh, Kara?" The older waitress's eyes lit up with recognition. Sweet girl, always picked up extra shifts. She'd bring little Zoe in sometimes before her shift started. That child would color pictures for all our regular customers. "How is she doing recently?" Lucas pressed, noting how the waitress's expression shifted. "Running herself ragged, poor thing," she sighed, wiping down the counter. "Last week she nearly dropped a whole tray of dishes. Her hands were shaking so bad from exhaustion. But she wouldn't take a break, kept saying she needed the hours." Back at the station, Lucas found Zoe curled up in his chair, clutching her teddy bear. When she saw him, her whole face brightened. "Lucas, you're back!" She jumped up, hugging his legs. "You're my hero. Just like Mommy says heroes help people." Lucas felt something crack in his carefully maintained professional facade. He knelt down to Zoe's level, gently touching the teddy bear's worn ear. "You know, I had a sister who loved teddy bears too," he said softly. "Really?" Zoe's eyes widened with interest. "Yeah." Lucas smiled, though there was a hint of sadness in his eyes. Her name was Emily, and she had a whole collection of them. Her favorite was a little brown one, just like yours. "Where is she now?" Zoe asked innocently. Lucas swallowed hard. "She's in heaven now, but sometimes, when I see teddy bears like yours, it makes me think of her and smile." Zoe studied his face for a moment, then held out her teddy bear. "Mr. Fuzzy can give you a hug too," she declared solemnly. Maria, watching from her desk, saw the moment Lucas's usually guarded expression softened completely. He accepted the teddy bear's hug with appropriate seriousness, and for just a second, she glimpsed the caring soul he usually kept hidden behind his professional demeanor. "Thank you, Zoe," Lucas said, his voice slightly rough. "That's exactly what I needed." Lucas spread the journal entries across his desk while Maria leaned in, scanning the hurried handwriting. The pages were filled with Kara's deepest fears and hopes, each entry more revealing than the last. "Listen to this one," Lucas said, his voice tight with emotion. "I can't lose her. They're watching, waiting for me to slip up, but she's all I have left." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in his features. Maria's brow furrowed as she picked up another entry. "There's more here. She mentions feeling trapped, like she's running out of options." She looked up at Lucas. "This doesn't sound like someone abandoning their child. This sounds like a mother terrified of losing her daughter." "Exactly." Lucas gathered the papers, arranging them carefully. "The question is, who was she afraid of?" Their discussion was interrupted by Evelyn Scott's sharp knock on the doorframe. The social worker's expression was stern as she entered the room. "Officer Hayes, We need to discuss Zoe's placement. I've located a foster family willing to take her immediately. Lucas stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. Ms. Scott, we're in the middle of an active investigation. There are too many unanswered questions. With all due respect, officer. Evelyn's voice was clipped. A police station is no place for a child to stay indefinitely. Just give us more time, Lucas pleaded, his professional demeanor cracking slightly. 24 hours. That's all I'm asking. Evelyn's eyes softened slightly as she glanced through the window where Zoe sat playing with her teddy bear. After a long moment, she sighed. 24 hours, Officer Hayes. Not a minute more. As Evelyn left, Zoe wandered into the office, dragging her teddy bear behind her. Is the mean lady mad at me? She asked in a small voice. No, sweetheart, Maria assured her quickly. She's just trying to help. Zoe climbed onto Lucas's chair, but as she settled in, her teddy bear slipped from her grasp and tumbled to the floor. The impact caused something unusual. A small tear along the bear's seam split open further, revealing a hidden pocket. Lucas knelt down, picking up the bear carefully. Something was protruding from the newly exposed opening. With gentle fingers, he reached in and pulled out a folded photograph. The image showed Kara, her smile bright but her eyes tired, standing next to a man Lucas didn't recognize. The man's arm was around her shoulders in what appeared to be a protective gesture. "Who's this with your mom, Zoe?" Lucas asked, holding up the photo. Zoe's face lit up with recognition. "That's Uncle Mike. He used to visit sometimes, but then Mommy got really sad and we moved away." Lucas and Maria exchanged meaningful looks. The name Mike hadn't appeared in any of Kara's journal entries, but the photograph suggested a close relationship. "Did Uncle Mike make your mom happy or sad?" Maria asked gently. Zoe's face scrunched up in concentration. "Both, I think. They used to laugh a lot, but then they had big fights. Mommy cried after." Lucas studied the photograph more closely, noting the familiar features between Kara and the man. The same shaped eyes, similar nose. This wasn't just any Mike. This had to be Michael Thompson, Kara's brother. And the timing of their falling out might be the key to understanding Kara's current situation. Maria pulled Lucas aside, keeping her voice low. "The custody fears, the sudden move, the hidden photo, it's all connected to this Uncle Mike somehow." Lucas nodded, his mind racing with possibilities. And whatever happened between them was serious enough for Kara to hide his picture in her daughter's teddy bear. Lucas held the photograph firmly as he faced Michael Evans in the station's interview room. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across Michael's face, highlighting the family resemblance to the woman in the picture. "Care to explain this?" Lucas placed the photo on the metal table between them. Michael's eyes widened slightly before he composed himself. "Where did you find that?" Michael's voice wavered. "In Zoe's teddy bear, hidden." Lucas leaned forward, studying Michael's reaction. "You told us you were Zoe's father, but this photo suggests something different." Michael's shoulders slumped. He ran a hand across his face, suddenly looking tired. "I'm Kara's brother," he admitted. "I've been trying to find them for months." "Why lie about being Zoe's father?" Maria asked from her position by the door, her arms crossed. I thought it would be easier to get information that way." Michael's eyes darted between the two officers. "Look, I made mistakes. Kara and I had a falling out 3 years ago. She asked me for money, a lot of money. When I refused, she disappeared with Zoe." Lucas exchanged a skeptical glance with Maria. The story didn't align with Kara's journal entries about feeling watched and trapped. "That's not how Zoe remembers it," Lucas said carefully. "She mentioned fights, crying." Michael shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "It was complicated. Family always is." "Let's make it simple then," Lucas replied. "We'll have Zoe come in. If you're really her uncle, she should recognize you." Michael nodded too quickly. "Of course, yes, that makes sense." Maria left to get Zoe while Lucas maintained steady eye contact with Michael. Something about the man's demeanor felt rehearsed, almost desperate. When Maria returned with Zoe, the little girl stopped in the doorway. Her small hand clutched her teddy bear tightly as she stared at Michael with wide, uncertain eyes. "Hi, Zoe," Michael said, his voice artificially cheerful. "Remember me? Uncle Mike?" Zoe took a step backward, pressing herself against Lucas's legs. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You're not Uncle Mike." Michael's face reddened. "Zoe, sweetheart, it's been a while. You were very little." "No!" Zoe's voice rose sharply. She turned and buried her face in Lucas's uniform pants. "I want my mommy!" Lucas placed a protective hand on Zoe's shoulder, feeling her small body shaking. "I think we're done here." "You can't just shut me out," Michael protested, standing up. "She's my niece. I have rights." "Rights you gave up when you lied about being her father," Maria cut in firmly. "We'll need to verify your identity and relationship before any further contact." Michael's composed facade cracked slightly. "This is ridiculous. I'm trying to help." "Then you won't mind if we look into your background," Lucas said calmly, though his hand remained protective on Zoe's shoulder. "Standard procedure." Michael's jaw clenched. "Fine. Do what you need to do." He reached for his coat, movements sharp with frustration. "But remember, I'm family. That means something." As Maria escorted Michael out, Lucas knelt down beside Zoe. Her eyes were wet with tears, but she met his gaze steadily. "You did great, sweetheart," he said softly. "Can you tell me why you're sure that's not your Uncle Mike?" Zoe hugged her teddy bear closer. "Uncle Mike has a star on his hand, a blue one. Mommy said he drew it himself when he was little, like me." She looked up at Lucas. "That man didn't have a star." Lucas felt a chill run down his spine. Such a small detail, but it confirmed his suspicions. Michael Evans wasn't who he claimed to be, and now Lucas needed to find out why he was so interested in finding Kara and Zoe. Lucas sat in the dimly lit security office of Joe's Diner, his eyes fixed on the grainy footage playing on the small monitor. The timestamp showed 7:43 a.m., 2 days ago. His heart skipped a beat when he spotted them, Kara and Zoe settling into a corner booth. "There," he murmured, leaning closer. Even through the poor quality video, he could see Kara's exhaustion in the way she moved, but her love for Zoe shone through clearly. She helped Zoe with her coat, smoothed her hair, and kissed her forehead before sitting down. Maria stood behind him, watching intently. She doesn't look like someone planning to abandon her child. "No," Lucas agreed softly. "She looks like a mother at her limit, but still trying." After reviewing the footage several times, Lucas headed to the diner's counter, where a middle-aged waitress was refilling salt shakers. Her name tag read, Betty. "Excuse me," Lucas said, showing his badge. "I'm Officer Hayes. I'm hoping you were working here 2 days ago." Betty's eyes lit up with recognition. "Oh yes, I remember that morning. Sweet little girl with the teddy bear." She glanced at Zoe, who was holding Lucas's hand. "That's her, isn't it?" Zoe partially hid behind Lucas's leg, but peeked out curiously at Betty. "Her mother was here too," Lucas prompted. "Did she say anything that might help us find her?" Betty's face softened with concern. "Poor thing looked dead on her feet. She asked about affordable apartments in the area. Said she needed somewhere safe and quiet." Betty paused, thinking. "I told her about Pine Grove Apartments just down on Maple Street. It's not fancy, but it's clean and the manager's decent." Lucas felt a surge of hope. "Did she seem interested?" "Oh yes, wrote down the address and everything." Betty leaned closer, lowering her voice. "She seemed scared, officer, like someone looking over their shoulder, you know." Lucas nodded, thinking of Michael Evans and his suspicious behavior. "Thank you, Betty. You've been very helpful." Outside, Lucas knelt down to Zoe's level. "Want to go on another adventure with me? We might find your house." Zoe's face brightened. "With the yellow flowers?" "Maybe." Lucas smiled, helping her into his patrol car. Maria followed in her own vehicle as they drove to Pine Grove Apartments. The complex was modest but well-maintained, with 3 separate buildings arranged around a central courtyard. Lucas lifted Zoe from the car, and she immediately grabbed his hand. "Anything look familiar, sweetheart?" he asked gently. Zoe scanned the buildings, her small face scrunched in concentration. Then her eyes widened. "Look!" She pointed excitedly at the middle building, where someone had planted cheerful yellow daffodils along the walkway. "The yellow flowers!" Zoe tugged at Lucas's hand. "Mommy and me planted those!" Lucas exchanged a quick look with Maria, who was already on her radio requesting backup. His heart pounded as they approached the building. Zoe became more animated with each step, pointing out familiar details: the blue welcome mat, the crooked mailbox, the wind chime hanging by the entrance. "Third floor," Zoe announced confidently, pulling Lucas toward the stairs. "We live up high so we can see the stars at night." Lucas followed, hope and anxiety mixing in his chest. If Kara was here, why hadn't she reached out? If she wasn't, what would they find? But Zoe's certainty was unmistakable. This was home. As they reached the third floor, Zoe stopped in front of apartment 3C. Her small hand reached up to touch the door, and her voice came out in a whisper. "This is our house." Lucas's heart raced as he noticed the door to apartment 3C was slightly ajar. He exchanged a quick glance with Maria, who immediately drew her weapon. Lucas gently pulled Zoe behind him. "Zoe, sweetie, stay right here with Officer Maria for a minute, okay?" But Zoe's eyes were already filling with tears. "Mommy?" she called out, her voice trembling. Lucas pushed the door open slowly, his hand on his holstered weapon. The apartment was small but tidy, with crayon drawings taped to the walls and a well-loved couch covered in mismatched throw pillows. Then he saw her. Kara Thompson lay motionless on the living room floor, her dark hair spread around her like a fan. Papers were scattered everywhere: bills, job applications, and what looked like custody documents. Next to her outstretched hand was an empty prescription bottle. "Ma'am?" Lucas called out, rushing to her side. He pressed 2 fingers to her neck, holding his breath until he felt it. A pulse. Weak, but there. "Maria, call a bus. She's alive." "Mommy!" Zoe broke free from Maria's grasp and ran into the apartment. Lucas caught her before she could reach Kara. Hey, look at me," he said, turning Zoe to face him. Her little face was streaked with tears. "Your mommy is sleeping, but the doctors are going to help her wake up. Remember how brave your mom said you should be?" Zoe nodded, clutching her teddy bear tightly. Is mommy gone?" Her bottom lip quivered. "No, sweetheart." Lucas pulled her close, his own eyes burning with tears. "She's right here, and she's going to be okay. I promise." The paramedics arrived within minutes, their efficient movements filling the small apartment. Lucas held Zoe as they worked, explaining each step in simple terms to keep her calm. "See, they're giving your mommy special medicine to help her feel better," he said as the paramedics started an IV. "And now they're going to take her for a little ride to the hospital." Zoe watched everything with wide eyes, occasionally hiding her face in Lucas's shoulder when things seemed scary. As they loaded Kara onto the stretcher, her eyelids fluttered briefly, and she let out a soft moan. "Mommy?" Zoe called out hopefully. "She's starting to respond," one of the paramedics said. "That's a good sign." They moved quickly down to the waiting ambulance, Lucas carrying Zoe while Maria secured the apartment. In the parking lot, Zoe reached out toward the ambulance where they were loading her mother. "Can I go with Mommy?" she asked in a small voice. Lucas held her a little tighter. "The doctors need space to help your mom right now, but we'll follow right behind them in my car, okay?" Zoe wrapped her arms around Lucas's neck. "You'll stay with me?" "Of course I will." Lucas rubbed her back gently as the ambulance sirens started up. "You're my favorite hero," Zoe whispered into his shoulder, her small body trembling slightly. Lucas felt his throat tighten as he carried her to his patrol car. He'd seen so much darkness in his years as an officer, but this little girl's trust and resilience touched something deep inside him. As he buckled her into the back seat, he made a silent promise to both Zoe and her mother. They wouldn't have to face this alone anymore. The hospital room was quiet except for the steady beeping of monitors and the soft whispers of a mother and daughter reunited. Kara lay in the stark white bed, holding Zoe close to her chest as tears streamed down her face. Her dark hair was tangled and her skin was pale, but her eyes were clear and alert now. "I'm so sorry, baby," Kara whispered, stroking Zoe's hair. "Mommy didn't mean to scare you like that." Zoe snuggled closer, her teddy bear squished between them. "I thought you were playing hide and seek," she said innocently. Lucas stood near the doorway, watching the reunion with Maria beside him. His chest felt tight as he observed their embrace, remembering how close they'd come to a very different outcome. "Ms. Thompson," the nurse said gently, checking Kara's vitals. "Your blood pressure is still low, but it's improving. The doctor wants you to rest for at least another day." Kara's eyes filled with fresh tears. "I can't. I have work. 3 jobs, actually. I'll lose them if I don't show up." "3 jobs?" Lucas stepped forward, his voice soft but firm. "That's what led to this collapse. The doctor said you were severely dehydrated and exhausted." Kara looked down, her hands trembling slightly as they held Zoe. "I didn't have a choice. With the custody battle coming up." She glanced nervously at Zoe, who was playing with her teddy bear, seemingly oblivious to the adult conversation. "Michael Evans?" Lucas asked quietly. Kara's head snapped up, her eyes wide with fear. "How do you—" "He came to the station looking for Zoe," Maria explained. Lucas didn't let him near her. "He's my brother," Kara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He thinks I can't take care of Zoe properly. He's been threatening to sue for custody, saying a single mother working minimum wage jobs isn't fit to raise her." Her voice broke. "I've been trying so hard to prove him wrong." Lucas pulled a chair closer to the bed. "Ms. Thompson, 18 Kara, what you did wasn't wrong. You were trying to provide for your daughter, but you don't have to do this alone anymore." "Officer Hayes," Kara started. "Lucas," he corrected gently, "and I want to help. We can connect you with resources, legal aid, better job opportunities. There are programs designed specifically for single parents." Maria stepped forward. "The department works with several local organizations. We can help you find more stable employment, maybe even affordable childcare." Kara looked overwhelmed, holding Zoe tighter. "I don't know how I could ever repay you for everything you've already done. Finding me, taking care of Zoe." "Mommy," Zoe interrupted, holding up her teddy bear. "Lucas is my hero. He found you when you were sleeping." Fresh tears spilled down Kara's cheeks as she looked at Lucas. "Thank you," she whispered, "for keeping her safe, for finding me, for understanding." "Your daughter is pretty special," Lucas said, smiling at Zoe. "She never lost faith that we'd find you. She's as strong as her mother." The nurse returned with medication, and Kara reluctantly let Zoe slide off the bed. The little girl immediately went to Lucas, taking his hand as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "We'll figure this out together," Lucas assured Kara. "Right now, you need to focus on getting better. Zoe and I will be right here." Kara nodded, exhaustion evident on her face despite her relief. As she drifted off to sleep, Zoe climbed into Lucas's lap, her teddy bear clutched tight. "Is Mommy going to be okay now?" she asked softly. "Yes, sweetheart," Lucas answered, watching Kara's peaceful expression. "Your Mommy's going to be just fine." Back at the station, Lucas and Maria sat across from Kara in the small interview room. Zoe was contentedly playing with blocks in the corner, supervised by a kind-faced officer through the window. The little girl had built a wobbly tower, her teddy bear positioned as the apparent architect of her creation. Kara's hands wrapped around a warm cup of coffee, her hospital bracelet still visible on her wrist. Though she looked better after 2 days of rest, exhaustion still lingered in the shadows under her eyes. "Take your time," Maria said gently, her notepad ready. "We need to understand everything about Michael to help protect you and Zoe." Kara took a shaky breath. "Michael wasn't always like this. When our parents died, he became controlling. He thought he knew what was best for everyone, especially me. She glanced at Zoe, making sure her daughter couldn't hear. When I got pregnant, he tried to take over my life completely. Lucas leaned forward, his expression concerned. What do you mean by take over? He offered to support us financially, but there were conditions. Kara's voice trembled. He wanted me to move in with him, follow his rules, raise Zoe his way. When I refused, she paused, wiping away a tear. He said I was being stubborn and ungrateful, that I'd never make it on my own. Maria made notes while exchanging a knowing look with Lucas. They'd seen this pattern before, family members using money as a weapon of control. He disappeared after that, Kara continued. No calls, no help, nothing. I struggled, but Zoe and I were happy. We were free. Her fingers tightened around the coffee cup. Then last month, he showed up at one of my jobs, said he'd been watching us, that he could see I was failing as a mother. Lucas felt a familiar protective instinct rising. Is that why you were working so many jobs? To prove him wrong? Kara nodded, her eyes filling with tears. He threatened to sue for custody, said he had resources, connections, that no judge would side with an exhausted single mom over a successful businessman. She looked at Zoe again, who was now showing her teddy bear how to stack blocks. I was so scared of losing her. That's not going to happen, Lucas said firmly. What you've done, working multiple jobs, sacrificing everything for Zoe, that shows dedication, not failure. Maria set down her pen. We've seen the storage unit, Kara. The photos, the letters you wrote to Zoe. Those aren't the actions of an unfit mother. Michael doesn't see it that way, Kara whispered. He thinks love isn't enough, that money and status are what matter. Lucas shook his head. The law doesn't see it that way either. Your brother abandoned you for years. He has no legal standing to demand custody now. We're going to help you document everything, Maria added. Every threat, every interaction. We'll build a case to protect you and Zoe. Kara looked between them, hope flickering in her tired eyes. You really think we can fight him? We know we can, Lucas assured her. And you won't be doing it alone anymore. At that moment, Zoe toddled over with a block in her hand. Mommy, look, I made a castle. She climbed into Kara's lap, completely unaware of the heavy conversation she'd interrupted. Kara hugged her daughter close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. It's beautiful, sweetheart. Lucas watched them, remembering the scared little girl he'd found in the parking lot just days ago. Now, seeing mother and daughter together, he understood exactly what they were fighting for. This wasn't just about custody or legal battles. It was about protecting the pure, simple love between a mother and her child. Lucas stood in the hospital hallway, his arms crossed as he faced Michael Evans. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows on both men's faces, highlighting the tension between them. Your sister tells a different story about your relationship, Lucas said, keeping his voice low but firm. She mentioned threats about custody. Michael adjusted his expensive tie, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. Kara's always been dramatic. I was trying to help her, offer her a better life. Is that so wrong? Help doesn't usually come with threats, Lucas countered, studying Michael's reactions carefully. Or disappearing for years when someone refuses that help. Look, Officer Hayes, Michael sighed, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. I made mistakes, I know that now, but she's my sister, and Zoe's my niece. I have a right to be in their lives. Lucas stepped closer, his police training evident in his authoritative stance. Rights come with responsibilities. Where were you when Kara was working 3 jobs? When she was struggling to keep a roof over Zoe's head? A flash of guilt crossed Michael's face, quickly replaced by defensiveness. I thought she needed to learn independence, to see that she couldn't do it alone. She did do it alone, Lucas corrected him. She just shouldn't have had to. After a long moment, Lucas led Michael to Kara's hospital room. Kara sat up straighter in her bed when they entered, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The morning sun streaming through the window highlighted the worry lines on her face. "Hello, Michael," she said quietly. Michael stood awkwardly at the foot of her bed. "Kara, you're looking better." "No thanks to you," she replied, then immediately closed her eyes, as if regretting the bitterness in her voice. "I want to make things right," Michael said, reaching into his jacket pocket and pulling out a checkbook. "I can help now. Really help. No strings attached." Kara's eyes fixed on the checkbook. "Like before? When your help meant controlling every aspect of my life?" "That was different. I was different then." Michael stepped closer. "I've changed, Kara. Seeing you in here, knowing how close I came to losing you both." Lucas watched from near the door, ready to intervene if needed. He noticed movement in the hallway and saw Zoe peeking around the doorframe, her teddy bear clutched tight against her chest. "You can't buy back the years you were gone," Kara said, her voice trembling. "You can't erase what you said, how you made me feel." Michael's facade cracked slightly. "I was angry when you refused my help. Proud, maybe. I thought I knew better than you, and when you chose your own path?" He trailed off, looking down at his expensive shoes. "You abandoned us," Kara finished for him, "because I wouldn't let you control us." Zoe chose that moment to toddle into the room, her small face scrunched up with concern. She looked at Michael, then quickly ran to Lucas, wrapping herself around his leg. "The scary man is making Mommy sad," she announced loudly, pressing her face against Lucas's uniform. Michael flinched as if he'd been struck. The sight of his niece seeking protection from a stranger rather than coming to him seemed to hit harder than any accusation. "I'm not," he started, then stopped, looking lost. The checkbook in his hand suddenly seemed meaningless. Kara watched her daughter clinging to Lucas, then turned back to her brother. The tension in the room was thick enough to touch, weighted with years of hurt and misunderstanding. Lucas placed a protective hand on Zoe's head, feeling her tiny fingers grip his uniform tighter. The little girl's innocent observation had cut through all pretense, exposing the raw truth of their family's fractures. After Michael's departure, a heavy silence filled the hospital room. Kara slumped back against her pillows, exhaustion etched across her face. Lucas pulled up a chair beside her bed while Zoe settled on the floor with her crayons, humming softly to herself. "I've been thinking," Lucas said gently, "about ways to help make things easier for you and Zoe." Kara's eyes flickered with uncertainty. "You've already done so much." "There's a job placement program through the community center," Lucas continued. "They specialize in helping single parents find stable work with flexible hours and—" He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "There's also a counseling service that offers sliding scale fees." Kara's shoulders tensed. "I don't need therapy," she whispered, but her trembling hands betrayed her. "Sometimes being strong means asking for help," Lucas said softly. He glanced down at Zoe, who was focused intently on her drawing. "After I lost my sister Sarah, I thought I had to handle everything alone." This caught Kara's attention. She turned to face him fully, her eyes questioning. "Sarah was only 24, Lucas continued, his voice thick with emotion. "Car accident. I threw myself into work, refused to talk about it. Thought that made me tough." He shook his head. "Instead, I just got lost in the dark." "What changed?" Kara asked quietly. "My partner Maria wouldn't let me hide. She practically dragged me to grief counseling." A small smile touched his lips. "Turns out being brave sometimes means admitting you're not okay." Kara's eyes welled with tears. "I'm just so ashamed. I should be able to take care of my daughter without help. Without—" She gestured helplessly at the hospital room. "Mommy?" Zoe's small voice interrupted. She stood up, clutching a piece of paper in her hands. "I made us." Lucas helped lift Zoe onto the bed, where she proudly displayed her crayon drawing. 3 figures stood hand in hand, one tall with a police uniform, one with long brown hair, and a tiny figure in the middle. "See?" Zoe pointed excitedly. "That's Officer Lucas, and that's you, Mommy, and that's me. We're all happy now." Kara's breath caught as she studied the simple drawing. Lucas felt something warm spread through his chest at being included in Zoe's family portrait. "You know what I see here?" Lucas asked, pointing to the drawing. I see love. And sometimes love means letting people help you. Maria appeared in the doorway, carrying a folder of resources she'd gathered. She smiled at the scene before her. The community center has childcare too, Maria added, stepping into the room. And there's a support group for single moms that meets twice a month. Kara looked at the drawing again, then at Zoe's hopeful face, and finally at Lucas. I'm tired of being scared, she admitted. Tired of doing everything alone. You're not alone anymore, Lucas assured her, surprised by how much he meant those words. We'll figure this out together, one step at a time. Zoe snuggled against her mother's side, adding another crayon to her picture, a bright yellow sun in the corner. Can Officer Lucas help us color? She asked innocently. The simple question brought a genuine smile to Kara's face. I think that's a wonderful idea, sweetie. As Lucas accepted a blue crayon from Zoe, he caught Kara's eye. The fear and shame he'd seen earlier had softened, replaced by something. The court summons arrived on a Tuesday morning. Kara's hands shook as she read the official document, her face growing paler with each line. Lucas, who had stopped by to check on them before his shift, watched as the paper slipped from her trembling fingers. He's trying to take her, Kara whispered, her voice breaking. Michael's filing for custody of Zoe. Lucas picked up the document, his jaw tightening as he read. The legal language was cold and precise, citing Kara's recent hospitalization and financial instability as grounds for the custody petition. This isn't right, Lucas said, pulling out his phone to call Maria. Something's not adding up about your brother. Kara sank onto the couch, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Zoe, who had been playing with her teddy bear nearby, looked up with worried eyes. Mommy? She asked softly, patting over to where Kara sat. Don't cry, Mommy. But Kara couldn't stop. The tears flowed freely now as she pulled Zoe close, holding her as if someone might snatch her away at any moment. I can't lose you, she whispered into Zoe's hair. I can't. Maria arrived within the hour, her laptop tucked under her arm. She and Lucas sat up at the small kitchen table while Kara tried to compose herself. Look at this, Maria said, turning her screen toward Lucas. Michael Evans has been involved in multiple business ventures over the past 5 years. All of them failed mysteriously, but not before he extracted significant funds from his partners. Lucas leaned in, his expression darkening. Pattern of manipulation? Definitely, Maria nodded. He approaches vulnerable people, gains their trust, then uses leverage to control them financially. 3 former business partners filed complaints, but nothing stuck. He's not after Zoe, Lucas realized, his voice low with anger. He's using her to get to Kara. Evening settled over the apartment, but Kara remained withdrawn, barely touching her dinner. At bedtime, Zoe pulled out her favorite storybook, climbing onto her mother's lap. Can we read about the princess, Mommy? Zoe asked hopefully. The one who saves everyone? Kara stared blankly at the wall, tears sliding down her cheeks. The book lay unopened in Zoe's small hands as she waited for a response that didn't come. Here, sweetheart, Lucas said gently, sitting beside them. Why don't you tell me the story instead? Zoe hesitated, looking between Lucas and her mother. Then she crawled into Lucas's lap, opening the book with careful fingers. Once upon a time, she began in her sweet, childish voice, there was a brave princess who lived in a tower. As Zoe continued her story, mixing up details and adding her own imaginative twists, Kara remained lost in her fears. Lucas held Zoe securely, his heart aching for both mother and daughter. The little girl's voice grew sleepier as she neared the end of her tale. And they all lived happily. Zoe yawned, her head drooping against Lucas's chest. Ever after. The book slipped from her fingers as she drifted off to sleep, secure in Lucas's protective embrace. He looked over at Kara, who had curled into herself on the other end of the couch, her eyes vacant and red-rimmed. We're not going to let him win, Lucas promised quietly, careful not to wake Zoe. "Maria and I will help you fight this." The next morning, Lucas arrived early at the police station, his desk already covered with papers and legal documents. He'd barely slept, spending most of the night researching custody cases and making calls to local legal aid organizations. "You look terrible," Maria commented, setting down a cup of coffee on his desk. "But I like that determined look in your eyes." Lucas managed a tired smile. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about Michael's pattern. We need to show the court who Kara really is, not just defend against his accusations." He grabbed his jacket and car keys. "I'm heading to Sally's Diner first. The owner there knows Kara well." The bell above the diner's door chimed as Lucas entered. Sally Martinez, a round-faced woman in her 60s, looked up from behind the counter and waved him over. "Officer Hayes," she said warmly. "I heard about what happened to Kara. That poor girl worked herself to exhaustion right here in my diner." Lucas pulled out his notepad. "That's actually why I'm here, Sally. We need people who can speak to Kara's character, especially her dedication to Zoe." Sally's eyes grew fierce. That woman worked every late shift she could get, always with little Zoe coloring quietly in the corner booth. She'd help clean up while keeping one eye on her daughter, never complaining once. As Sally spoke, Lucas wrote quickly, documenting every detail. "Would you be willing to testify to this in court?" "In court?" Sally's eyes widened. "Is someone trying to take that baby away from her mama?" When Lucas explained about Michael's custody petition, Sally's face reddened with anger. "You tell me when and where, Officer Hayes. I'll tell them exactly what kind of mother Kara is." Throughout the day, Lucas visited other businesses where Kara had worked. At each stop, he found people eager to help. Mrs. Chen from the laundromat described how Kara would fold clothes with Zoe sleeping in a makeshift bed nearby. The grocery store manager recalled Kara taking extra shifts while teaching Zoe to count using cereal boxes. That evening, Lucas drove to Kara's apartment, his folder thick with statements and contact information. He found her sitting at her small kitchen table, surrounded by bills and paperwork. "Look who's here," Zoe exclaimed, running to hug his legs. "Lucas, can we play princess again?" "In a little bit, sweetheart," he promised, ruffling her hair. "First, I need to talk to your mom." Kara looked up, dark circles under her eyes matching his own. "Any news?" Lucas spread the papers across the table. "I've been gathering statements all day. You've got more people in your corner than you realize, Kara." As he explained about Sally and the others, tears welled in Kara's eyes. "They'd really do that for us?" "Of course they would," Lucas said softly. "They see what I see, a mother who would do anything for her daughter." Zoe climbed onto her mother's lap, reaching for a crayon. "Can I help too, Mommy?" Kara hugged her close, some of the tension finally leaving her shoulders. "You help just by being you, baby." Lucas watched them together, remembering his own sister and the way she used to hold him when he was scared. "We're going to fight this, Kara. All of us, together." For the first time since receiving the court summons, Kara's smile reached her eyes. "Thank you, Lucas, for everything." "Now," Lucas said, turning to Zoe with a grin, "I believe someone mentioned something about a princess game?" Zoe's face lit up as she scrambled down from Kara's lap. "You have to wear the crown this time." The courthouse loomed before them, its stone steps seeming to stretch endlessly upward. Kara clutched Zoe's small hand tightly as they climbed, her other hand gripping a worn folder containing her financial records and work history. Lucas walked beside them, his police uniform pressed and pristine. "Remember what we practiced," he said softly. "Just tell the truth. That's all you need to do." Inside the courtroom, Michael Evans sat at the plaintiff's table in an expensive suit, his lawyer shuffling through documents. When he caught sight of Zoe, he smiled and waved, but she buried her face in Kara's skirt. "All rise," the bailiff called as Judge Eleanor Martinez entered. The proceedings began with Michael's testimony, his voice smooth and practiced. "Your Honor, I only want what's best for my niece," Michael said, gesturing to his financial statements. "I can provide Zoe with opportunities my sister simply cannot afford. Private schools, music lessons, a stable home. Kara's hands trembled as she listened. When it was her turn to speak, her voice quavered. I work hard for my daughter," she began, stumbling over her words. "I know it's not much, but could you tell us about your current employment situation?" Michael's lawyer interrupted. "How many jobs do you currently hold?" "3, Kara whispered, her cheeks flushing. "But I'm managing—" "So you're rarely home with your daughter?" the lawyer pressed. "In fact, didn't you recently collapse from exhaustion, leaving your 3-year-old alone?" Tears welled in Kara's eyes. From his seat behind her, Lucas clenched his fists, waiting for his turn to testify. Sally Martinez, the diner owner, spoke next. "I've watched Kara work herself to the bone," she declared firmly. "That woman would go without eating just to make sure her daughter had enough. You want to talk about character? That's character." Finally, Lucas took the stand. He straightened his uniform and looked directly at the judge. "Your Honor, when I found Zoe that morning, I assumed the worst," he began. "But what I discovered was the opposite of abandonment. I found evidence of a mother's absolute dedication." He described the storage locker, the journal entries, the countless job applications. Kara Thompson works 3 jobs, yes, but she's created a schedule that allows her to be there for every bedtime story. She clips coupons to save money but never misses buying art supplies for Zoe's development. Lucas's voice grew passionate. "I've watched Zoe draw pictures of her mother as a superhero. I've seen Kara sing lullabies after double shifts. That's not neglect. That's love in its purest form." From her seat, Kara wiped away tears as Lucas continued. "Mr. Evans speaks of providing opportunities, but Zoe already has the greatest opportunity of all, a mother who would sacrifice everything for her happiness." The judge listened intently, her expression thoughtful. When all testimony concluded, she adjusted her glasses. "This is clearly a complex case requiring careful consideration. I'm postponing my final ruling for 2 weeks to review additional evidence." After the hearing, Kara found Lucas in the courthouse hallway. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I couldn't have faced this without you." "You're stronger than you think," Lucas replied, watching as Zoe colored quietly nearby. "You've been fighting for her all along. I just helped make sure people saw it." Kara smiled through her tears. "You did more than that. You believed in us when nobody else would." The community center buzzed with voices as neighbors filed in, filling the plastic chairs Lucas had arranged in neat rows. Kara sat in the front, Zoe coloring contentedly in her lap, while Maria Delgado helped distribute papers and pens for testimonials. "I can't believe all these people came," Kara whispered, her eyes wide as she scanned the familiar faces. Mrs. Chen from the apartment down the hall waved warmly. The elderly woman had been first to arrive, eager to share how Kara would check on her daily, often bringing soup or helping with groceries despite her own exhausting schedule. Lucas stood at the front of the room, his police uniform replaced with casual clothes that seemed to soften his usual official demeanor. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "We're here to support Kara Thompson and her daughter Zoe. Many of you know them, and your stories could make a real difference in their lives." One by one, neighbors stood to share their experiences. Sally Martinez, the diner owner, spoke about late nights when Kara would help clean up after her shift, refusing extra pay but accepting leftover food to share with others in need. "Even when she had nothing," Sally said, her voice thick with emotion, "she always found ways to give." Tom Baker, whose wife had been ill last winter, described how Kara had watched his kids for free while he took his wife to chemotherapy. "She didn't just watch them," he added. "She helped them with homework, made sure they ate properly. And this was while working 3 jobs herself." As the stories continued, Maria quietly approached Lucas with a folder. "You need to see this," she murmured, showing him bank statements she'd uncovered during their investigation of Michael Evans. Lucas's eyes narrowed as he studied the documents. A series of suspicious transfers showed large sums moving through offshore accounts, with dates coinciding with Michael's sudden reappearance in Kara's life. While Lucas absorbed this information, Zoe tugged at his pant leg, holding up a crayon drawing. His heart melted as he knelt down to examine it. There he was, drawn in wobbly lines wearing what appeared to be a cape, standing beside stick figures of Kara and Zoe. "That's you," Zoe explained seriously, pointing at the caped figure. "You're our superhero." Lucas swallowed hard, touching the simple drawing with gentle fingers. "Thank you, sweetheart," he managed, his voice rougher than usual. Kara watched their interaction, her eyes glistening. "She's right, you know," she said softly. "You've been our guardian angel through all of this." The meeting continued as more neighbors shared their stories. Mrs. Rodriguez described how Kara had helped her learn English during lunch breaks. The local librarian spoke about Kara bringing Zoe to story time every Saturday, no matter how exhausted she was from working overnight shifts. Maria organized each testimonial carefully, building a powerful narrative of a mother who, despite her struggles, consistently put others first and created a loving environment for her daughter. As the meeting wound down, Lucas pulled Kara aside to share what Maria had discovered about Michael. "These transactions," he explained, pointing to the suspicious patterns, "they're not just questionable, they could be illegal. This could change everything in the custody case." Kara stared at the documents, hope blooming in her eyes. "Do you really think this could help?" "It shows his true character," Lucas replied firmly. "And combined with all these testimonials," he gestured to the room full of supporters, many of whom were still sharing stories and offering encouragement to Kara, "we're building a strong case for you and Zoe." Zoe, who had been collecting her crayons, returned to Lucas's side and slipped her small hand into his. The simple gesture of trust made his throat tight with emotion. Looking at her innocent face, then at Kara's grateful smile, Lucas felt his carefully maintained professional distance continuing to crumble. The courthouse steps were cold and gray under the morning sun. When Lucas spotted Michael Evans talking to a small group of reporters, his blood ran cold as he caught fragments of Michael's words. Abandoned her own child, mentally unstable, unfit mother. Lucas's jaw clenched as he strode forward, his police badge glinting at his hip. The reporters turned at his approach, cameras swinging in his direction. "Officer Hayes," Michael greeted him with a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just sharing my concerns about my niece's welfare." "You mean spreading lies," Lucas said firmly, keeping his voice level despite the anger burning in his chest. "Step aside. We need to talk." The reporters watched eagerly as Lucas led Michael away from their microphones. Once they were out of earshot, Lucas turned to face him squarely. "We both know what you're doing," Lucas said, his voice hard. "Using Zoe as leverage against your sister. The question is why?" Michael's smile turned smug. "I'm simply concerned about my niece. Is it wrong to want what's best for her?" "What's best for her?" Lucas's eyes narrowed. Like abandoning her and Kara years ago when they needed help, or showing up now when Kara's finally building a stable life. A flash of something, anger, guilt, crossed Michael's face before his smooth mask returned. "You don't know anything about our family history, Officer Hayes." "I know enough," Lucas countered. "I've seen the bank records, Michael. Those offshore transfers, they tell an interesting story." Michael's confident demeanor faltered for just a moment. "You're overstepping, officer. This is a family matter." Inside the courthouse, Kara sat on a wooden bench, her hands trembling as she scrolled through social media on her phone. Michael's accusations were everywhere, spreading like poison. Zoe sat beside her, humming softly while coloring in her favorite book, blissfully unaware of the storm around her. Maria Delgado approached, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Kara and sat down beside her. "Don't read that garbage," she said gently, touching Kara's arm. "We have real evidence, real testimonies from people who know you." Kara's eyes welled with tears. "But what if people believe him? He sounds so convincing, so concerned." Her voice broke. "Sometimes I wonder if he's right. Maybe I am unfit." "Stop right there," Maria said firmly. "Look at your daughter." They both turned to watch Zoe, who was carefully coloring inside the lines, her small face scrunched in concentration. She looked up and gave them a bright smile, holding up her picture. Look, Mommy. I made it pretty. It's beautiful, sweetheart, Kara whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Back outside, Lucas stepped closer to Michael, his voice low and intense. Whatever game you're playing, whatever angle you're working, it stops now. These are people's lives you're toying with. Michael's facade cracked slightly, revealing a glimpse of bitterness underneath. You have no idea what Kara owes me, what she took from me. She doesn't owe you anything, Lucas responded. And using her daughter as a weapon? That tells me everything I need to know about your character. Michael's eyes hardened. We'll let the judge decide that, won't we, Officer Hayes? He turned to leave, then paused. You seem very invested in my sister's case. Personal interest, perhaps. Lucas watched him walk away, his hands clenched at his sides. Through the courthouse windows, he could see Kara and Zoe sitting together, their heads bent over a coloring book, and his resolve strengthened. Whatever Michael was planning, Lucas would be ready. Lucas sat across from James Foster in a quiet corner of the local diner. The former business partner of Michael Evans nervously twisted a paper napkin in his hands, his coffee growing cold and untouched. Michael always had a way of turning family situations to his advantage, James explained, his voice barely above a whisper. He'd offer help, but there were always strings attached, always conditions. Lucas leaned forward, his notepad ready. Can you be more specific about what happened with his previous dealings? James nodded slowly. There was his cousin's small business. Michael invested, then used the leverage to drain it dry. And his aunt's inheritance, he managed to get power of attorney then. James shook his head. The pattern was always the same. Help first, control later. And you'd be willing to testify to this? Lucas asked, hope rising in his chest. Yes, James replied firmly. It's time someone stood up to him. What he's doing to his sister and that little girl, it's not right. Back at the station's conference room, Kara stood before an empty chair, practicing her speech. Lucas watched from the doorway as she gained confidence with each word. I've made mistakes, Kara said, her voice growing stronger. I've struggled, but everything I've done has been for my daughter. Every extra shift, every missed hour of sleep. It was all to give Zoe a better life. Lucas nodded encouragingly. That's good, very good. Remember to look at the judge when you speak. Kara took a deep breath, her shoulders relaxing. You know what's strange? For the first time in years, I feel like I can breathe. Like maybe I don't have to carry this weight alone anymore. A small voice piped up from behind them. Order in the court! Zoe had climbed onto a chair, wearing Lucas's spare police cap that nearly covered her eyes. She banged a plastic water bottle like a gavel. Kara's serious expression cracked and she burst into laughter. Your Honor, I object. Overruled, Zoe declared, though it was clear she had no idea what the word meant. She pointed the water bottle at Lucas. Policeman, you're in big trouble. Lucas raised his hands in mock surrender. Guilty as charged, Your Honor. Maria Delgado entered the room carrying fresh coffee and smiling at the scene. I see we have a new judge in town. Zoe beamed proudly. I'm helping Mommy practice her big speech. And doing a wonderful job, Kara said, lifting Zoe from the chair and hugging her close. The best judge ever. Lucas watched the moment unfold, noting how different Kara looked from the exhausted, frightened woman they'd found in the apartment. There was color in her cheeks now, determination in her eyes. Let's try the part about your community involvement again, Lucas suggested gently. Remember what the diner owner said about you helping during the holiday rush? Kara nodded, setting Zoe down. Right. And maybe I should mention the after-school program I volunteered with even when I was working 3 jobs? Exactly, Lucas agreed. Show the judge how you've always put down roots in the community, even when things were tough. Maria added, and don't forget to mention how Zoe's preschool teacher praised her progress. It shows your dedication to her education. As Kara resumed her practice, speaking with renewed confidence, Zoe settled into a chair next to Lucas, still wearing his oversized police cap. She pulled out her ever-present coloring book and began to draw, humming softly to herself. "Mommy's doing great," she whispered to Lucas, her small face serious. "She's not scared anymore." Lucas smiled, watching Kara stand tall as she delivered her speech. "No, she's not scared anymore. And you know what? She's going to do amazing things." The courthouse buzzed with nervous energy as James Foster took the stand. Lucas watched from his seat beside Kara, noting how Michael Evans shifted uncomfortably in his chair across the aisle. "Mr. Foster, please tell the court about your business dealings with Mr. Evans," the prosecutor requested. James cleared his throat, his eyes briefly meeting Michael's before focusing on the judge. "I witnessed multiple instances where Michael used family connections for financial gain. He had a pattern of offering help during difficult times, then using that leverage to control situations." Michael's attorney objected, but the judge allowed the testimony to continue. "His cousin's bakery, for example," James continued. "Michael invested when they were struggling, then gradually took over operations. Within a year, he'd drained their accounts and left them worse off than before." The judge leaned forward. "And you have documentation of these events?" "Yes, Your Honor." James gestured to the stack of papers before him. "Bank statements, contracts, everything showing the pattern." When it was Kara's turn to speak, Lucas noticed her hands trembling as she approached the stand. She wore her best dress, a simple blue one she'd borrowed from Maria, and her hair was neatly pulled back. Despite her obvious nervousness, she held her head high. "Ms. Thompson," the judge said kindly, "please tell us about your relationship with your daughter." Kara took a deep breath, her eyes finding Zoe, who sat quietly with Maria in the back row. "Zoe is everything to me, Your Honor. When I left home with her, I had nothing but determination and love. I worked 3 jobs, cleaning offices at night, serving breakfast at the diner, and doing data entry from home." Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "I missed sleep, but I never missed a chance to read her a bedtime story. I skipped meals sometimes, but Zoe always had healthy food. When she needed new shoes, I picked up extra shifts. When she had nightmares, I was there no matter how exhausted I was." Lucas watched the judge's expression soften as Kara spoke. Even Michael seemed affected, though he tried to hide it. "I'm not perfect," Kara admitted, her voice cracking slightly. "That day when Officer Hayes found Zoe, I had pushed myself too hard. I collapsed from exhaustion, and it scared my little girl. It was my wake-up call. Since then, I've accepted help from my community. I've learned that being strong doesn't mean doing everything alone." The judge nodded thoughtfully. "And what changes have you made since then?" "I've reduced my workload to 2 stable jobs with better hours. I've joined a single parents support group, and I'm taking online classes to improve my job prospects. Most importantly, I'm present for Zoe, physically and emotionally." Kara's eyes welled with tears. "Your Honor, my brother offers financial stability, but Zoe needs more than money. She needs love, consistency, and a mother who would move heaven and earth for her. That's what I provide, and that's what I'll always provide." The courtroom fell silent as the judge considered her words. After a moment, she spoke. "I'd like to schedule a home visit to evaluate Zoe's living conditions. This will help inform my final decision." She looked directly at Kara. "Ms. Thompson, your dedication is evident, but I need to ensure the environment is suitable for a child." "Of course, Your Honor," Kara replied, relief visible on her face at not receiving an immediate negative ruling. As they stood for the judge's exit, Lucas noticed Zoe beaming at her mother from the back of the courtroom, pride shining in her young eyes. Maria held the little girl's hand, giving her a gentle squeeze of reassurance. The morning sun filtered through the curtains of Kara's small apartment as an unexpected knock echoed through the rooms. Kara's heart skipped a beat when she opened the door to find Judge Martinez and Mrs. Reynolds, the court-appointed social worker, standing in the hallway. "Good morning, Ms. Thompson," the judge said warmly. "We're here for the home evaluation." Kara's hands trembled slightly, but she managed a genuine smile. "Please come in." Thanks to Lucas's help over the past few days, the apartment sparkled. Fresh flowers brightened the windowsill, and Zoe's artwork decorated the walls in neat arrangements. The living room doubled as Zoe's play area, with educational toys stored in colorful bins. "Mommy, look who's here," Zoe called out excitedly from her small table where she was coloring. She jumped up, her pigtails bouncing, and ran to greet the visitors. Mrs. Reynolds knelt to Zoe's level. "What are you drawing, sweetheart?" "It's my family," Zoe declared proudly, holding up her artwork. "See? That's Mommy, that's me, and that's Officer Lucas. He's our hero." The judge's expression softened as she studied the crayon figures holding hands under a bright yellow sun. "Tell me about Officer Lucas, Zoe." Zoe's face lit up. "He found me when Mommy was sleeping, and he made everything better. He reads me stories and helps Mommy with the groceries. Sometimes we go to the park, and he pushes me on the swings really high." As Zoe chatted, the judge and social worker toured the apartment. They noted the well-stocked kitchen with healthy snacks at child height, the neat bathroom with Zoe's step stool, and the bedroom the mother and daughter shared. A privacy curtain divided the space, giving each their own area. "And look at my special corner!" Zoe tugged the judge's hand toward her reading nook. "Officer Lucas helped me build it. We put up twinkly lights and everything." The small space featured a beanbag chair, a small bookshelf, and string lights that created a magical atmosphere. Above hung a sign that read, "Zoe's Reading Adventure Corner," in careful lettering. Lucas's handiwork. "Zoe, why don't you show Mrs. Reynolds your favorite book?" the judge suggested, turning to speak privately with Kara. "Ms. Thompson, I see significant improvements here," she said quietly. "But more than the physical space, I'm struck by your daughter's sense of security and happiness." Tears welled in Kara's eyes. "Thank you, Your Honor. I know it's not perfect, but—" "Perfect isn't what we're looking for," the judge interrupted gently. "We're looking for love, stability, and a child's well-being. Those things are evident here." After the officials left, Lucas stopped by to check on them. He found Kara sitting on the couch, emotionally drained but hopeful. "You did great," he assured her, settling beside her while Zoe played with her teddy bear nearby. "I couldn't have done any of this without you," Kara whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "When everyone else assumed the worst about me, you looked deeper. You believed in me when I barely believed in myself." Lucas watched Zoe humming to herself as she arranged her stuffed animals for a tea party. "You know, when I first found her that morning, I thought I was just doing my job. But somehow you both changed everything." Kara nodded, understanding the unspoken depth of his words. They sat in comfortable silence, watching Zoe play, both aware of how far they'd come from that frightening morning in the parking lot. "Would you like some pretend tea?" Zoe asked, holding up a plastic cup with a bright smile. "We'd love some," Lucas answered, and Kara couldn't help but notice how natural the word "we" sounded coming from him. The courthouse buzzed with tension as everyone gathered for the final custody hearing. Kara sat at the front, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, while Lucas and Maria flanked her supportively. Zoe waited outside with the diner owner, Mrs. Chen, who had become like a grandmother to her. Michael Evans stood confidently at the opposite table, wearing an expensive suit and a practiced smile. His lawyer shuffled papers importantly, preparing for their final argument. "Your Honor," Michael began, his voice smooth and controlled, "I can provide Zoe with opportunities my sister simply cannot afford. Private schools, dance lessons, summer camps, everything a child could want." He gestured to a folder of brochures. "I've already researched the best educational programs in my neighborhood." Kara's breath caught in her throat, but Lucas squeezed her shoulder gently. When it was their turn, he approached the bench with quiet determination. "Your Honor, I'd like to present these testimonials from Kara's community." Lucas handed over a thick stack of letters. Mrs. Chen from the local diner describes how Kara would bring Zoe to work during late shifts, creating a quiet corner where Zoe could sleep safely while her mother earned their living. The neighbors tell stories of Kara helping others even while struggling herself. The judge listened intently as Lucas continued. "I've also uncovered evidence of Mr. Evans's previous financial dealings." He produced documented proof of Michael's questionable business practices. "This shows a pattern of using family relationships for personal gain." Michael's face darkened as his past came to light. His lawyer attempted to object, but the judge waved him off, studying the papers carefully. When Kara stood to speak, her voice trembled but grew stronger with each word. Your Honor, I know I'm not perfect. I know I've struggled. But everything I do, every extra shift I take, every penny I save, it's all for Zoe. She's not just my daughter, she's my heart walking around outside my body. Tears streamed down her face as she continued. I made mistakes when I collapsed that day. I was trying so hard to do everything alone. But I've learned it's okay to accept help, to be part of a community. Zoe deserves more than material things. She deserves love, stability, and the knowledge that her mother will never, ever give up on her. The courtroom fell silent as the judge considered her decision. Outside, they could hear Zoe's faint laughter as she played with Mrs. Chen. Finally, the judge spoke. After careful consideration of all evidence presented, I find it in the best interest of the child to remain in the full custody of her mother, Kara Thompson. The words hung in the air for a moment before their meaning sank in. Kara's hands flew to her mouth as tears of relief spilled over. Lucas beamed, and Maria wiped her eyes discreetly. Furthermore, the judge continued, Mr. Evans's petition for custody is denied. Ms. Thompson has demonstrated extraordinary dedication to her child's welfare, and the community support she has cultivated speaks volumes about her character. The courthouse doors opened and Zoe bounded in, running straight to her mother. Mommy! 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 She cried, launching herself into Kara's arms. Kara lifted her daughter, holding her close as they both cried happy tears. My baby, she whispered. My precious girl. Michael stood stiffly, his face a mask of controlled anger, as he watched the scene unfold. Community members who had come to support Kara surrounded her and Zoe, creating a protective circle of love and joy. Lucas watched the mother and daughter embrace, his own eyes misty. Maria nudged him gently. You did good, partner, she said softly. Back at the police station, colorful streamers hung from the ceiling and balloons bobbed gently in the air conditioning. Officers had pushed their desks aside to make room for a small celebration, complete with a chocolate cake that Maria had picked up from the local bakery. Zoe sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by her beloved crayons and paper, her teddy bear propped up beside her. Her small tongue poked out in concentration as she worked on yet another masterpiece. Look, she exclaimed, holding up her latest drawing. That's Officer Maria with a cape, and there's Mommy with sparkly powers. Maria crouched down beside her, admiring the child's artwork. Oh my goodness, you made me look so strong. Is that a magic wand I'm holding? Uh-huh, Zoe nodded enthusiastically. It's for catching bad guys and making people happy. Across the room, Kara watched her daughter, her eyes still glossy with leftover tears of relief. She stood near the coffee machine, clutching a paper cup between her trembling hands. Lucas noticed her distant expression and made his way over. Penny for your thoughts? He asked softly. Kara gave a shaky laugh. I should be nothing but happy right now, shouldn't I? We won. Michael's gone, but... She paused, taking a deep breath. I'm scared, Lucas. What if I can't do this? What if I mess up again? Lucas turned to face her fully. Hey, look at me, he said gently. You're not alone anymore. You've got an entire station full of people who care about you and Zoe. We're going to help you find a better job, maybe even get you enrolled in some classes if you want, one step at a time. But what if... Kara started. No what ifs, Lucas interrupted kindly. You're stronger than you know. I've seen it firsthand. Their conversation was interrupted by the pitter-patter of small feet. Zoe ran up to them, clutching another drawing. This one's special, she announced, thrusting the paper toward Lucas. He knelt down to examine it and his heart caught in his throat. There he was, drawn in crayon, wearing a police uniform with a giant heart on the chest. Beside him were two smaller figures, clearly Kara and Zoe, all holding hands. That's us, Zoe explained matter-of-factly. You're the biggest 'cause you're our hero. She climbed onto his lap without hesitation, something she'd been doing more and more lately. Her small hands played with his badge as she looked up at him with those innocent eyes. Then, in that pure, unfiltered way that only children can manage, she whispered, I wish you could be my daddy. The room seemed to freeze. Lucas felt his chest tighten with emotion, unable to form words. He saw Kara's hand fly to her mouth, her eyes wide. Even Maria, who was passing by with paper plates, stopped in her tracks. Zoe, oblivious to the impact of her words, simply snuggled closer to Lucas, continuing to trace the outline of his badge with her tiny fingers. The simple trust in her gesture, the pure love in her statement hit Lucas like a physical force. He swallowed hard, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill. This little girl, who had started as just another case, had somehow worked her way deep into his heart. And her mother, who had shown such incredible strength and resilience, had become someone he couldn't imagine not having in his life. The moment hung in the air, heavy with unspoken emotions and possibilities. Around them, the celebration continued, officers chatting, forks clinking against paper plates, the occasional burst of laughter. But in their little bubble of space, time seemed to stand still. The sweet aroma of freshly baked bread filled the small bakery as Kara tied her apron behind her back. Mrs. Chen, the kind-hearted owner, had taken her under her wing after Lucas's recommendation. The morning sunlight streamed through the storefront windows, casting a warm glow on the display cases filled with pastries and cakes. "You're getting better with the decorating," Mrs. Chen noted, watching Kara pipe delicate rosettes onto a birthday cake. "Those steady hands of yours are perfect for this work." Kara smiled, her confidence growing with each day. "Thank you, Mrs. Chen. I never thought I'd enjoy something so much." Across town, Zoe was building a tower of blocks with her new friends at Happy Hearts Daycare. Her teacher, Miss Sarah, marveled at how quickly the once shy little girl had blossomed. Zoe's drawings of her superhero decorated the classroom walls, each one featuring a stick figure in a police uniform. "Officer Lucas is coming for dinner tonight," Zoe announced proudly to her friends during snack time. "He always brings me special stickers from the station." Later that evening, Lucas arrived at Kara's apartment carrying grocery bags. The space looked different now, warmer, more lived in. Crayon drawings covered the refrigerator, and cheerful curtains hung in the windows. Zoe's excited squeals echoed through the apartment as she ran to greet him. "My superhero!" she exclaimed, wrapping her arms around his legs. "Did you catch any bad guys today?" Lucas chuckled, setting down the bags to properly hug her. "Just helped some lost puppies find their way home," he replied, making Zoe giggle. As they prepared dinner together, Lucas and Kara moved around the small kitchen with comfortable familiarity. Zoe sat at the table, coloring and chattering about her day at daycare. The scene felt natural, as if they'd been doing this forever. After Zoe went to bed, Lucas and Kara sat on the small balcony, sharing cups of tea. The night was quiet, with only distant traffic sounds breaking the silence. Kara wrapped her hands around her warm mug, looking thoughtful. "I never thought I'd have this," she said softly. "Stability, peace, a job I actually enjoy." She paused, meeting Lucas's eyes. "People who care about us." Lucas shifted in his chair, his expression gentle. "You know, after I lost my sister, I shut down completely, threw myself into work, avoided connections." He took a deep breath. "But then this stubborn little girl with a teddy bear showed up in a parking lot." Kara laughed softly, wiping away a tear. "She has that effect on people." "It wasn't just Zoe," Lucas admitted. "Watching you fight so hard, never giving up despite everything. It reminded me what strength really looks like." "I wasn't strong," Kara whispered. "I was terrified, but you believed in me when no one else did, even when I didn't believe in myself." The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken feelings. A gentle breeze rustled the potted plants Zoe had helped plant on the balcony. From inside, they could hear her soft snores through the baby monitor. "Thank you," Kara said suddenly, her voice thick with emotion. "Not just for helping us win against Michael, but for everything. For showing us what having someone in our corner feels like." Lucas reached across the small space between them, gently squeezing her hand. The touch was simple but filled with meaning. The seasons changed, painting the small town in vibrant spring colors. What had started as chance encounters and shared meals had grown into something deeper, more meaningful. Lucas found himself spending most of his free evenings with Kara and Zoe, his heart warming at the way Zoe's face lit up whenever he walked through their door. On a sunny Saturday morning, they spread a checkered blanket under an old oak tree in the park. Zoe danced around them, her pigtails bouncing as she chased butterflies. Lucas watched her with a tender smile, remembering how far they'd come from that frightening day in the parking lot. "Be careful, sweetheart," Kara called out, arranging sandwiches on paper plates. Her hair caught the sunlight, and Lucas found himself studying the way she moved with such natural grace. "Look what I found." Zoe came running back, her small hands cupped around a dandelion. "Make a wish, Lucas." She thrust the fluffy seed head toward him with such earnestness that both adults had to suppress their laughter. Lucas made an exaggerated show of closing his eyes tight before blowing the seeds into the wind. Zoe clapped with delight, then snuggled between them as they shared their picnic lunch. Their weekend routine now included trips to the local library, where Zoe would proudly lead Lucas by the hand to the children's section. She'd pile books in his lap, her eyes wide with excitement as she pointed out her favorites. "This one has a princess who saves herself," she explained seriously during one visit, showing Lucas a well-worn picture book. "Just like Mommy did." Kara, who had been shelving Zoe's previously borrowed books, paused at these words. Her eyes met Lucas's across the reading nook, both of them touched by Zoe's innocent observation. One evening, as Lucas helped prepare dinner in Kara's small kitchen, Zoe sat at her little table nearby, surrounded by crayons and paper. The radio played softly in the background, while Lucas and Kara worked in comfortable synchronization, him chopping vegetables while she stirred the pasta sauce. "Done!" Zoe announced proudly, holding up her latest masterpiece. "It's for both of you." Lucas and Kara moved closer to examine the drawing. 3 figures stood hand in hand, one tall with a police badge, one with long brown hair and a small figure between them. Above them, in Zoe's wobbly handwriting, were the words, "My forever family." Kara's breath caught in her throat. She reached for Lucas's hand without thinking, squeezing it tightly as tears welled in her eyes. Lucas felt his own eyes growing moist, overwhelmed by the simple truth in Zoe's artwork. "Do you like it?" Zoe asked, bouncing on her toes with anticipation. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Lucas managed to say, his voice rough with emotion. He knelt down to hug her, and Zoe threw her arms around his neck. "Can we put it on the fridge?" she asked, looking up at her mother. Kara wiped her eyes, nodding. "Of course we can, baby, it's perfect." As they hung the drawing with a butterfly magnet, their hands brushed. Lucas and Kara's eyes met, a world of unspoken feelings passing between them. The moment stretched, filled with warmth and possibility, while Zoe hummed happily beside them. The timer dinged, breaking the spell. They returned to preparing dinner, moving around each other with practiced ease. But something had shifted, acknowledged in that shared glance. This wasn't just 3 people spending time together anymore. Somehow, without anyone quite noticing when it happened, they had become exactly what Zoe's drawing showed, a family. The old diner buzzed with warmth and laughter as neighbors packed into every available space. Colorful streamers hung from the ceiling, and hand-painted signs decorated the walls with messages of support for Kara and Zoe. The diner owner, Martha, had transformed her restaurant into a community gathering space, with tables pushed together to make room for the growing crowd. "I can't believe how many people came," Kara whispered to Lucas, her eyes wide as she took in the scene. She clutched his arm, overwhelmed by the outpouring of support. One by one, community members stood up to share their stories. Mrs. Chen from the corner store spoke about how Kara always found time to help her bring in deliveries, even after working long shifts. The librarian recalled how Kara would read to other children while waiting for her laundry to finish at the laundromat. "That's just who Kara is," the diner owner added, her voice thick with emotion. "Always thinking of others, even when times were tough." Lucas watched Kara's face as she listened, seeing tears gather in her eyes. He remembered the scared, exhausted woman he'd found in that apartment months ago, and his heart swelled with pride at how far she'd come. Zoe tugged at Lucas's sleeve, bouncing on her toes. "Can I say something too?" she whispered loudly, making several people chuckle. Lucas lifted her onto a chair so everyone could see her. Standing beside her protectively, he held the microphone while Zoe faced the crowd with a bright smile. "Thank you, everybody, for being nice to my mommy," she began, her clear voice carrying through the diner. "And thank you for the presents and the cake and—" She paused, looking around at all the familiar faces. "This is the happiest I've ever been." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Kara pressed her hands to her mouth, tears flowing freely now. Lucas helped Zoe down, and she ran straight into her mother's arms. After the event wound down and the last guests departed, Lucas suggested a walk to help Kara process everything. They strolled along the quiet street, Zoe skipping ahead of them to chase fireflies in the early evening light. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up," Kara said softly, watching her daughter play. "All these people, their kindness. It doesn't feel real sometimes." Lucas nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "You touched more lives than you realized, Kara. You were never really alone. You just needed someone to help you see that." Kara stopped walking, turning to face him. "Life is finally turning around," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "For the first time, I feel like I can breathe, like maybe things will be okay." Lucas looked at her with gentle eyes, the same ones that had given her hope on her darkest days. "You're not alone anymore," he said simply, his words carrying the weight of a promise. Lucas sat in the station's break room, staring at the transfer application on his desk. The promotion would mean better pay and more opportunities, but his heart felt heavy at the thought of leaving. Maria Delgado watched him from across the room, noting his troubled expression. "You've been looking at that paper for 20 minutes, she said, pulling up a chair. "What's holding you back?" Lucas ran a hand through his hair. "I should want this. It's what I've worked for. But now there's Kara and Zoe," Maria finished softly. "Yeah." Lucas smiled despite himself. "Every time I think about leaving, I see Zoe's face. And Kara, she's finally finding her footing here." Maria leaned back, studying her partner. "You know, sometimes the best career move isn't about the job at all." Later that afternoon, Lucas took Kara and Zoe to the park. The sun painted long shadows across the grass. As Zoe chased bubbles, Lucas blew into the air. Her laughter echoed across the playground, making other parents smile. Suddenly, Zoe stopped running. She turned to Lucas with those big, innocent eyes that always seemed to see right through him. "Are you going to leave us?" she asked, her voice small and worried. Lucas's heart clenched. He knelt down to her level, the bubble wand forgotten in his hand. "How did you know about that?" "I heard you talking to Miss Maria on the phone," Zoe admitted, twisting the hem of her dress. Kara stepped closer, her expression a mixture of concern and something else Lucas couldn't quite read. "Come here, kiddo," Lucas said gently. Zoe walked into his open arms, and he hugged her close. "I promise I'll always be here for you. Both of you," he added, meeting Kara's eyes over Zoe's shoulder. That evening, after dropping them off at their apartment, Lucas sat in his car for a long time. The transfer application sat heavily in his jacket pocket, but his mind was clear for the first time in days. He pulled out the paper and looked at it one last time. The next morning, he walked into the station and straight to Maria's desk. She looked up expectantly. "I'm staying," he said simply. "My life is here now. With them." Maria smiled knowingly. "I had a feeling you'd say that. Some things are worth more than a promotion, aren't they?" Lucas nodded, thinking of Zoe's laughter and Kara's smile. He could see their future together. Birthday parties, school plays, quiet evenings at home. The picture in his mind felt right, felt complete. "When did you get so wise?" he asked Maria with a grin. "Someone has to keep you straight," she replied, tossing a paperclip at him. "Now, go call Kara. I'm sure she'd like to hear the news." Lucas spent the morning carefully arranging the picnic basket, making sure to include all of Zoe's favorites: peanut butter and jelly sandwiches cut into heart shapes, apple slices, and chocolate chip cookies. He'd even remembered Kara's preferred strawberry lemonade. The spring air was crisp as he pulled up to their apartment. Zoe burst through the door first, her curls bouncing with excitement. "Lucas, is it really a surprise?" "It sure is, Princess," he laughed, helping her into her car seat while Kara locked up. At the park, Lucas led them to their special spot under the big oak tree. Zoe immediately spotted the colorful blanket he'd laid out earlier. "Look, Mommy, Lucas made it pretty for us." She twirled around, her yellow dress catching the breeze. They spent the afternoon playing tag and blowing bubbles. Lucas taught Zoe how to make daisy chains, though his clumsy fingers couldn't quite master the delicate task. Kara laughed at his attempts, her eyes sparkling with joy. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky in soft pinks and oranges, Lucas reached into his pocket. His heart beat a little faster as he pulled out the small velvet box. "Kara," he said softly, "I got something for you." Zoe scooted closer, curious as Kara opened the box. Inside lay a delicate silver necklace with a charm that read, "Strength." "Because you're the strongest person I know," Lucas explained, his voice gentle. "Everything you've done for Zoe, how you never gave up. You amaze me every day." Tears welled in Kara's eyes as she touched the charm. "Lucas, it's beautiful." He helped her fasten the necklace, his fingers brushing against her neck. When their eyes met, something shifted between them. Kara reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers. Zoe jumped up suddenly. "Wait right there!" She ran ahead, stopping to gather wildflowers from the grass. Turning back, she proudly presented her bouquet to them both. "These are for my family," she declared, beaming. Lucas and Kara shared a laugh, their hands still joined as Zoe distributed her flowers between them. The setting sun cast a golden glow around them, making everything feel magical and new. If you enjoyed the story of Lucas, Kara, and Zoe, I handpicked this next story that will touch your heart. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.